Richardson. He's worked for 25 years for a local bus company, Sanders Coaches. Everybody knows about Sanders. He was and is a driver, a traffic supervisor, and he also is a divisional envoy for the Salvation Army. He's local, lives in Hull, and I think the S on the epaulets are not for Sanders, are they?
No, they're not.
They're for the Salvation Army. So we're going to hear a little bit about Ian's story. So, Ian.
Thank you. Good morning. It's lovely to see so many of you here. It really is. So, how did I get from being a bus driver to convincing the company that it needs a chaplain? Well, it's taken about 25 years. Well, in fairness, I've been a chaplain for the last 3 years, so it's taken about 22 years to get there to convince them. But there are hurdles you have to overcome. You can't just walk into a company and say, you need a chaplain, and just expect it to happen just like that. The first biggest hurdle I came across was a contract. We all have to sign employment contracts, and one of the stipulations in the contract says you must not enforce your religious or political beliefs on any other member of staff. So there's a hurdle to start with. I can't just go in and talking about Christ to my fellow colleagues. It doesn't work like that. Because I need a job, I need to live, I need to work. So I have to find a way around that and sign the contract, say yes, I'm going to come and work for you at that time as a bus driver. So how do you get around that? Well, it's simple. You kind of make people aware. The beautiful thing of social media is it has its downsides, but the beautiful thing of social media is people can look you up and find out bits and pieces about you. And on my Facebook page, you'll quite happily tell you that I'm a divisional envoy in the Salvation Army. If you want to know more about that, come and speak to me afterwards, because I don't think I've got time to cover that today, but it's a simple thing, really. But so it'll mention that I've been a chaplain to some scouts in the past, and there's various other bits and pieces about my faith and my belief in it. So how do you overcome not being able to force your religious things upon your religious beliefs upon other people? Well, as I say, it's simple. Once they get to know about you, they'll come and ask you. And when people come and ask you, you're not forcing your beliefs on them, you're just answering a question. So how do you overcome it? You wait for people to come towards you. Remember when Jesus sent out the 12 and said, go out and preach, drive out demons, so on and so forth. You will come across people that do not want to listen. And as you leave that place, knock the dust off your feet, off your sandals, as a testimony against them, and walk away. You will always come across people that do not want to listen to the word of God. It's that simple. Don't waste your time arguing. God said that himself. Jesus said it himself, send it to 12. Do not waste your time on people that don't want to listen. An empty argument is not worth having. Okay? Go and feed the souls of those that want to hear from you. So you overcome that problem by waiting for people to come to you. You let them know in other ways, i.e. thankfully social media in my case, that you belong to the Salvation Army, you belong to a church, you're a Christian. You don't force your beliefs upon them. You wait for them to come to you. And if they want to, well, trust me, the Lord has worked wonders throughout Sanders over the years that I've been there, and they will come and speak to you. It is that simple. You don't have to worry about overcoming contracts. When you've got a faith in God, he will overcome those contracts for you. He will overcome those problems. It is that simple. It really is that simple. And the journey moves on from there. And let me share one other thing with you, because I've got something else listed on here that's quite nice. There was a particular school run. How do you know that the Lord is with you all the time? Well, when you're at work and something very specific happens, as a Christian, you say, thank you, Lord. It's that I'm going to use this phrase, it's that simple, because I'm a simple person with a simple faith. It is that simple. Let me share a story with you that happened 18, 19 years ago, something like that. I was bringing some school children into Cromer Junior School, nice and local. And it was a split load between Cromer Juniors and Cromer Infants, so parked at one side and then dropped around at the other. Because it was two schools, it required a double-decker. So because they were infants, what we used to have, we'd have one of the parents would take it in turns on a rota of being on the coach, on the bus with you, and acting as a kind of a chaperone for the children. So they'd be upstairs looking after the children upstairs, and you, whilst you were driving, would take care of things that were happening downstairs and just make sure everyone was okay. Now, I've got to say at this point, that was one of the nicest school journeys I've ever done. Those children were so well behaved. They really were. Over the years, I've taken thousands of children to school in the last 25 years. Absolutely thousands. And I can't say that all of them are angels and saints. I genuinely can't. But this particular journey was one that every driver looked forward to. They were a really lovely bunch of children. Whether it's because they had one of the parents on the bus with them, I don't know. But they really were a lovely bunch of children. You'd pick them up, they would sit down, they'd chat to each other as they do. But it would be a really nice journey. Really pleasant, quiet, comfortable, no hassle. One particular morning, I picked these children up and we were driving through, and the last pickup was outside, just across the road, outside Cromer Church, was the last pickup. And this particular morning, these children that were absolute angels, they really were, I can't emphasise enough, they were a lovely, every driver looked forward to doing the Cromer Junior School run. They were lovely children. But this particular morning, they were rowdy, they were noisy, they were disruptive. I don't know what got into them, but they were awful, to say the least. They were awful. And even as a Christian, we are still human, and we all reach breaking point at some time. So I pulled away from Cromer Church, gone up the lights at Overstrand Road, gone across the lights, and decided enough. I'm going to pull over and have a word with these youngsters. I can't cope with this anymore. I just couldn't believe how these wonderful kids could be so noisy and disruptive. So I pulled over, stopped, got out of the seat, had a word with the children. The parent that was upstairs came down to see what was going on, and we'd taken a few moments just to say, look, come on, be fair, you're a great bunch of children. We've always got on well on this journey. Every bus driver loves carrying you to school. No, it's going wrong this morning. Chill out, settle yourselves down, and we'll carry on with the journey. We'll get you to school. But I can't concentrate with you making all this noise. You know, when you've got 70 odd primary school children on one vehicle, they can make a lot of noise. There's a reason why teachers have a class size of around, I think, about 20 to 25 at the moment. And that's, looking after that amount of children for a lesson is enough. But to suddenly find you've got 70 children on a double-decker bus, they can get quite noisy and disruptive. So we pulled over, we'd had a word with these children, got back in the seat, pulled away. Now, this is the roundabout just by Halsey House. I'm sure you're all local folk, you'll know where I'm talking about. And just coming up to that roundabout, a car comes down the hill, the Norwich Road hill in front of me, goes to turn in towards Cromwell Road. At the same time, a car comes out, ploughs into the back end of the car, and the one's come down Norwich Road, has spun out of control, gone through the safety barrier, and actually ends up through the brick wall of Halsey House with the front end teetering over the edge into the garden. What's that got to do with me and the noisy school children? Well, let me tell you, if I hadn't stopped for that amount of time, if those children had been quiet, and the wonderful children that they'd always been, my bus would have been on that roundabout at the same time the accident happened. Okay, it's a slightly more substantial vehicle, the damage wouldn't have been as bad, but those children would have been distraught, they would have been upset, and all of a sudden, instead of having 70 wonderful students, you've got 70 children that are shocked, upset, ambulances flying here, there, and everywhere. I firmly believe, sorry, I've got to remember not to wander too far from the spot, I firmly believe that the Lord was in control of that journey. Why otherwise would the nicest bunch of children be so rowdy? I believe the Lord had to find a way of making that journey stay safe, because the time difference, working out the time difference of me stopping to speak to those children and that accident happen was around about the same. I would have been on that roundabout, negotiating that roundabout at the same time that accident happened. So how do we know the Lord's at work? At work. The Lord is at work. It's because there are times when he actually shows himself very physically. There are times when he proves himself very definitely. And that's just one particular story, and there are others that I could have gone into. But that one is one that sticks in my mind very prominently. It's a time when right at the very time of need, the Lord stepped in, intervened, kept me safe, kept 70 odd children safe. And the very worst they saw was the two cars colliding, but at best, most of them, they were talking to each other. They wouldn't have seen much of what happened anyway. They'd have heard the bang and maybe looked up afterwards. But generally speaking, they weren't too affected by it. And we managed to get everyone dealt with. Someone else was there to look after the passenger or the car driver that just ploughed through the wall of Halsey House. And I carried on with the school journey. Absolutely wonderful. That's when you know that the Lord is at work, not just in your life, but in your work life. Funny little stories happen all the time. Someone said you could write a book on public transport and it would end up in the fiction section because quite often people wouldn't believe half the stuff that you'd come up with. Wonderful little story, just as a little aside. Many years ago, about 24, not long after I started at Sanders, back in the day, as I say, when buses had a gear stick and a ticket machine had a crank handle, none of this electronic stuff that they have nowadays. I was driving at dear old Bedford through the streets of Mumsley. Young lady got on with her daughter and they'd sat at the side. And this young daughter had obviously watched me driving and pulling away. Now, the gear stick on a Bedford is about so long, okay? And we've pulled away and I've changed gear a couple of times. And all of a sudden I heard this little girl say, Mummy, she says, Mummy. Yes, darling, what's wrong? She says, why does the driver need a walking stick? So there are some nice times as well. There's some lovely times and some funny stories. And I say, people, if you wrote a book on what happens in public transport, most of it you wouldn't believe has actually happened. There are some wonderful moments. So moving on, I've overcome the difficulties of the contract. You don't force your beliefs on others. Even the Lord himself said that. Walk away from them. If they don't want to hear you, that's not going to listen. So we've overcome the contract problems, proven that the Lord is at work in my life and in the company of Sanders Coaches and other companies, I believe. Just because a company doesn't have an appointed chaplain or an appointed person, a mentor or someone to go to, doesn't seem to say that the Lord isn't at work there. But we come to the stage where I've moved on. And I've gone from driver to operations controller, operations traffic supervisor. It seemed to have various titles around the place. Traffic supervisor. And I was happy doing my job, as you do. I've been there about 7 years over at North Horsham Depot. And I decided enough was enough. I want to move on. So at this 25 years, I've taken a gap. I left Sanders for some time. I went off. I became a freelance bus coach driver, organised my own tours. I would hire in a coach in exactly the same way that most folk would hire in a car. Because you had that licence, you had the contact, you'd hire in a coach, run my own tours, excursions, holidays, that sort of thing. Then felt a calling into ministry, and I went and spoke to the Salvation Army at the hierarchy, and rose to the dizzy heights of lieutenant. Not that that really means anything to anybody here. But I was stationed then, or appointed to the Salvation Army at Wisbeach. And was there running the Salvation Army for a very short while. Very short while. Throughout my life, I've had a couple of breakdowns. I don't mean buses and coaches, I mean nervous breakdowns, mental breakdowns, whatever the technical term is these days, I've had a couple of breakdowns. And the grace of God has carried me through. That is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So I've been appointed to Wisbeach Salvation Army. And life was a single minister. There may be other single officers, single ministers. Sorry, if I refer to an officer, that's what the Salvation Army call their vicars, their ministers. They're captains, lieutenants, majors, they're officers. So if I refer to one officer, it's a minister, it's a vicar, whatever you want to call them. I'm sorry, it's just, when you've been in the army for 40 odd years, you tend to just click into army mode and speak army terminology. So there will be other ministers and things out there that will disagree with me and say that they cope quite happily as a single officer. But myself, it became very lonely. It's great when you're with the corps, with the congregation, the corps. There's another army term, that's what we call a church, we call them a corps. So when you're with your folk, that's fine. When you're out in the street selling the war cry and working with people, that's fine. When you go home in the evening and suddenly find there's no one to talk to and no one to share with, it becomes very lonely and becomes very... And within the first sort of month or two, I started to feel because by now I've had 2 breakdowns. I know what the signs are. I know what the triggers are. I know how it's going to feel. So I started feeling this idea of actually this isn't going right. This isn't going right. I've always felt the call to full-time ministry. I believe that the Lord wanted Ian to be a minister on the outside, sharing with the world rather than full-time concentrating on one particular church. So I went and spoke to, again, the hierarchy of the Salvation Army, the divisional commander, and it was decided that the best thing health-wise for me would be to go on to divisional envoy. Now, a divisional envoy, I'll come and speak to me afterwards, because that will just take a little bit of time. But it's basically one that goes out and specials wherever needed. You know, it's the divisional envoy is to the Salvation Army what the territorial army is to the real army, if you know what I mean. They're the backup, so to speak. So I became a divisional envoy. But this means that I still need to work. So back I go cap in hand to Mr. Sanders and say, got any driving jobs going? To my surprise, he said, yes, Ian, we're glad to see you back. When can you start? Can you start tomorrow? Not quite that simple, but you know, we'll get to you as soon as I can. So within a week, I'd got another job back at Sanders, and they were really, really pleased to see me, which is nice. That is lovely. Not polishing my own halo. Sorry if it came across the wrong way, I do apologise. But it was so nice to be welcomed back to what the beautiful thing about Sanders. I know some people think we've got a bit of a bad reputation, but they're a family. And everybody that works for them becomes part of that family. And what's more, the Sanders are a Christian family. And everyone is made to feel welcome. Whatever your race, wherever you come from in life, the Sanders family will make you feel welcome. So I went back and worked for the Sanders family as a driver again. And I'd been with them 3 months, driving quite happily, based at North Horsham Depot, when Mr. Sir Charles Sanders himself, along with the company secretary, came across, and I happened to be on my lunch break at the depot, and Ian, can we have a word with you? Now, when the governor calls you into an office, you think, I've been back 3 months, what have I done? What could I have done? Your mind starts wandering over that day, that week. Has there been a complaint come in? What have I done wrong? What's gone wrong? Why does Charles want to word with him? Why has he brought the secretary with him? Is he making notes? Is it that serious? So, okay, brace yourself. You walk into the office, you sit down, and me being me, say, come on, out with it. What have I done wrong? Now, the company secretary, she, bless her, has a bit of sense of humour, and she sits there very stern, and then over the top of the glass it says, yes, Ian, what have you done? So again, your mind starts to wander. What's going on? Charles jumps in, don't panic, we just need to ask you a question. Last time you were here, you were a traffic supervisor. We need another traffic supervisor at North Horsham. Would you like to step up to the role again? Okay, I don't know about this. It can be a little bit stressful at times. Am I ready for it? So we'll take you on like everybody else. Whenever you start at Sanders, you're on a 3-month probation period. And if you change roles within the company, that 3 months starts again. If you're not happy within that 3 months, or if the company's not happy with the way you perform within that 3 months, you can just go back to the original job you had. So I said, right, we'll make that agreement. If within 3 months I decide I'm not happy as a traffic supervisor, I'll go back to being a driver. All agreed. Absolutely wonderful. So I went on, the role changed, and I went from traffic supervisor to actual depot manager with a couple of leading drivers underneath me. And about 6 years ago, that would have been for about 6 years, about just under 3 years ago, excuse me, the pressure was getting too much. We're short-staffed. The world and his wife seems to be short-staffed at the minute. You know, everywhere you look, there are job vacancies. You can pick up a job left, right and centre if you need one. And we are not exempt from that. As a coach company, bus company, we are still short-staffed. And the pressure was getting too much. And I decided, maybe it's time to move on again. Just at that time, the Salvation Army had an opening for a chaplain at the First Hill Care Home over in North Walsham. So let's apply for that. Let's become a chaplain to the Salvation Army. So I applied for the job, had the interview, had the second interview, and was actually given the job. The job became mine. I was officially given the role of a chaplain in the care home, the older person's care home, older people's services, so something along that call it. Yeah, old person's services, as a chaplain to the folk, not just to the residents, but to the staff as well within his care home. Absolutely over the moon. Thank the Lord, I'm out of the stress of Sanders and into a lesser paid role, but one that I'm going to enjoy. I went back to Sanders and gave them a month's notice, being decent, because they're not just replacing a driver, they're replacing a manager, so they need to find someone to move them into that job. So I give them a month's notice. Within the first week, obviously one or two people get there, Ian's leaving, he's moving on to something else. And within the first week, I got a phone call from the general manager. Ian, we need a chat. Can you come over and see me? So off I get in the car, trundle over to Hull. General manager says, let's go for a coffee. So we went to Byford's. He's a wealthy man, is the general manager. Me, it would have been probably Horatio's or something like that, but no, not him. He goes to Byford's. So we went to Byford's, sat there with a cup of coffee. Now this again is where you realise that the Lord steps in, and the Lord makes a way for every door that closes and another one opens. We sat there having coffee, and he says, I've had at least 4, possibly 5 members of staff come to me over the last week and say, you can't let Ian leave because we've got nobody to talk to when we have a problem. You can't let Ian leave because we've got no one to talk to. He is our Christian backup. He is the person, he is our go-to driver, our go-to member of staff. You can't let him leave. Quite humbled by this, thinking, what do I do now? Do I carry on and say, well, okay, you've had 6 years of me since I left and came back again? Or do I listen to what he's got to say? Okay, Lord, it's in your hands. Let's hear what the general manager has to say. I want to make you an offer, he says. I know that you're not happy being a depot manager anymore. I know your calling in life is to a ministry, and chaplaincy would be an ideal position for you. How do you feel about being a company chaplain for Sanders? The Lord's at work. Got there. Hurdle after hurdle, we've got there. It can't be full-time, because although there's over 100 members of staff working for Sanders, being a full-time chaplain, well, it just, there's not that great a need. There is a need, but it's not that great that there's someone knocking on my door every 5 minutes a day saying I'm feeling depressed or my mum's died and this happened and that's happened. We don't employ a bunch of people that are full of problems. But every one of us will encounter problems in life. And every time and then, every one of us will need somebody that we can confide in, we can talk to, and we can share with. So they created the job of customer services manager. So yours truly became customer services manager from scratch. Set it up yourself, do what you want, make the job your own. But we will also have an open door policy. There will also always be somewhere, if somebody wants a chat, somebody wants to confide in something, with an open door policy. You will be recognised as company chaplain. Yes. Thank you, Lord. 25 years it's taken. From overcoming that first hurdle of you can't force your religious and political beliefs on anybody, to you're a chaplain, there's an open door policy. Sanders Coaches recognises that there is a need. And the Lord himself, this is why I'm in Salvation Army uniform today. I was in 2 minds. Do I wear Sanders uniform? Do I wear Salvation Army uniform? The Salvation Army played a massive role in me becoming the chaplain at Sanders Coaches. Because if that job application hadn't gone in to become the chaplain at the Mildred Duff Care Home, then none of this would have happened. None of it would have happened at all. We'd have just plodded along and I don't know, maybe I'd have gone off and done something else somewhere, whatever. Salvation Army has had a massive impact on my life. Thankfully, it's now had a massive impact on the lives of some folk at Sanders. And there's been some wonderful opportunities come from it. I can't, for obvious reasons, share with you what people have come to me for. There's some very personal stuff and some very detailed stuff. But there's some wonderful opportunities that have come from it. Only last year, one of our drivers lost his mother, came and spoke to me, and I ended up having the privilege of leading the funeral service for that family. So not only then did I get connected to the driver, I got connected to the family and found the family and spoke to them and shared time with them. I've taken people through grief, through loss. I've taken people through times when they've said, I've just had enough, I can't cope. But it's just been the grace of God has opened a door to an open door policy at Sanders Coaches. It's been a wonderful 3-year journey, and hopefully there's many more years to come to go on for. But that's how you go from being a bus driver to a company chaplain in around about 22 years, because the last 3 have actually been recognised. So in 22 years, bus driver to company chaplain. It hasn't been an easy road. It hasn't been an easy road. And you know, as also a minister in my own right with the Salvation Army, we always have Bible passages that mean something to you. And there's always something to turn to. And one of my favourites, I want to share with you now, forgive me, I don't wear a watch. A friend of mine, who is a Quaker, once called it a horological handcuff. A wonderful experience, what a wonderful title. And having trained many years ago when I left school, I was on a YTS course and I was an apprentice in a jewellery store in Elsham. I was repairing clocks and watches. So for 2 years I was a trainee horologist. So horological handcuffs became a wonderful term and I absolutely loved it. So I don't know whether I've spoken for 20 minutes or half an hour, I don't know whether it's been 5 minutes and it's just gone really slowly. So forgive me. But there's been a wonderful experience of not having to worry about. Yes, when you're on the buses, time is important. You have a timetable. Believe it or not, we do our best to keep to those timetables. It's not always easy, but we do our best. But to not have to worry about time constraints when someone says, I need to have a word, you're there. If I am out on the road, the company will always make the first priority, let's get Ian off the road and get this person dealt with. Wonderful passage of scripture, 1 John chapter 3 says, how great the love the Father has lavished on us that we should be called children of God. Some wonderful words in it. The one that I love the most, lavished. What springs to mind when you think of lavished? It's extravagant. It's vast, isn't it? I always think of I tend to end up at my sister's for Christmas. And you get this mountain of food put in front of you at Christmas lunch and you don't know whether to eat it or get a step ladder and climb it. It's lavish. It's extravagant. And when you think of those, how great the love the Father has lavished, not just on me, but on you, and each and every one of us here, that we should be called children of God. Why shouldn't we, in return, make it our policy, our conviction, to share the love of God with everybody else? Okay? The love that is lavished on us. If he thinks that much of us, why should we not in turn share that love with other people? Surely that's our goal, that's our commission. How great the love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. Now just briefly, we've all understood what's happened between Ukraine and Russia. And there's a passage of scripture for everything, isn't there? Isaiah chapter 2 verse 4. He'll become ruler over all nations. They will beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not rise up against nation, neither will they train for war again. There's a promise from God. One day he'll return. He will be ruler of all nations. Spears to pruning hooks, swords to plowshares. Nations shall not train for war again. Isn't that a wonderful promise from God? His work here isn't done. It's our work at the moment. When he comes back, boy will we know it. And isn't it going to be great? 22 years, bus driver to chaplain. In reality, God has been there in my life in that 22-year span, and the last 3 years even more so, in recognition of chaplaincy, in sharing with others. In those moments when a driver walks across the depot and says, "Can you spare me 5 minutes?" and you go and sit on a bus. It's not necessarily, there will always be a room somewhere where we can go and chat. But occasionally it's just the last minute sort of, "Can you spare 5 minutes?" And you'll go and sit on a bus somewhere. Or you'll go and sit in the canteen if they're quite happy to share publicly. It's a wonderful experience. I thank you for listening. I thank you for the opportunity of coming to share with you. And hopefully somewhere along our lives, we've all got an opportunity to share, and we've all got an opportunity to inspire others towards a relationship with God. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Ian. Let's just move straight into questions. Anybody got any questions? And I'll bring this microphone over to you. Any questions?
You mentioned being a divisional envoy. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So in the Salvation Army, we work on military ranking, quasi-military ranking. So first position would be a soldier. Anyone who becomes a member of the Salvation Army signs what we call an article of war, which is a declaration to give up, to abstain from drinking, smoking, gambling, that sort of thing. You become a soldier. Okay. We then have the officer ranks, local officer ranks. So within the Salvation Army, you will have a bandmaster, a songster leader. Songster brigade is what we call our choir. We become a songster brigade, so we have a songster leader. You then have things like the corps sergeant major, and obviously the treasurer, the secretary, and things like that. Then you become officer ranks. So you go through to 2 years of training at the William Booth Training College in London, and then you come out as a lieutenant. After so many years, you become a captain to major, and then you go on to what are called staff ranks, which become lieutenant colonel, colonel, commissioner, and eventually the man at the top, the man next to God, as we call him, or the woman next to God, as has been the case, is the general. Divisional envoy sits somewhere between soldier and lieutenant. So some churches will call them non-stipendiary ministers, some will call them lay readers, lay preachers, and that's basically what a divisional envoy is. So I'm on the roll at Norwich Mile Cross. That's where I soldier, that's where I go to church. And if there is a particular corps, again a church, sorry I'm using army terminology, that hasn't got a minister for that week, then divisional headquarters or somebody will phone and say, "Ian, are you free? Can you go and lead worship at Aylsham, Sheringham, wherever?" It's called divisional envoy because I'm supposed to stay within the division, which is Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, Cambridgeshire, parts thereof. I'm supposed to stay within that division. But what the eye doesn't see, the heart won't grieve over. And if you don't tell the HQ that you've gone across to Derbyshire because you've been asked, then no one's going to know about it, they ain't going to worry. So that's what divisional envoy is. It's a lay minister, it's a non-stipendiary minister, it's whatever your church happens to call it. As I said earlier, the divisional envoy is to the Salvation Army what the Territorial Army is to the main service. They are the backup force that goes in when someone's needed. The word envoy itself simply means one who is sent. That's what it means, one who is sent. So where there is, usually it's one who is sent when there's a trouble somewhere, the envoy is sent in to sort it out. That's not the case with me. It is just the one who is sent. So if you've got a corps that needs someone to lead their worship, then yeah, that's what a divisional envoy does.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Perhaps just a comment, Ian. I think it's useful to remember some Christians aren't as forward as others, but the way we lead our lives is also always being in the spotlight, and we can actually be sending out a Christian message to people.
Absolutely.
And then come to us as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Share the Christian message, and if you have to, use words. Okay? If you have to, use words. The way you lead your life is the best Christian example, the best testimony, for want of a better word, that you can share with somebody, is the way you lead your life. Yeah, fully understand where you're coming from. I'm quite happy. I say, if you share the word, share the message, and if you have to, use words to emphasise it.
It's obviously easy to, as you are employed by a Christian company, then it's given you an opportunity. But obviously, most of us haven't been employed by a Christian community, so that makes it doubly difficult, doesn't it?
It does make it doubly difficult. I fully understand that. And which is why my friend here has just said, you know, everyone's that forward and thinking. It might not be the individual, it may be the company itself that isn't Christian based and isn't that forward thinking. If forward thinking is the right term to use. So again, it is a case of show Christ in your life by the way you lead your life itself, by your actions, by the way you generally lead your life. If somebody in that case if a work colleague wants to speak to you, probably the only way you'll be able to do that is to say, let's meet up after work for a cup of coffee somewhere and work it that way around. There's always going to be room for God's work. It will be hindered, there will be hurdles, and as I say, getting chaplaincy at some of those coaches wasn't without its hurdles, wasn't without its difficulties. But if you firmly believe there is a way, then God will make that way for you.
I'd just like to give sort of official thanks in the traditional way to Ian. Ian's been very open. I mean, talking about breakdowns and his whole life is fantastic, and it was really interesting to hear a local Christian company but a Christian working there. So thank you very much, Ian, and please join with me in saying thanks.